All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on today's webinar on data-driven success stories. My name is Megan Barasa, and I'm the program lead for the Micronutrient Data Innovation Alliance, or DINA for short, a program of the Micronutrient Forum, which is the central global platform for micronutrient health. DINA is an alliance of diverse stakeholders working together to improve the availability, accessibility, and use of micronutrient data, especially to support national decision makers as they design and implement micronutrient policies and programs. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes. There is simultaneous interpretation today for Spanish. To take advantage of this, you can click on the translation icon in the control panel at the bottom of the Zoom screen. You can use the Q&A function to ask questions, and it would be great if you could mention which speaker you'd like to direct your question towards. You can use the chat function for more general comments such as your own introductions. If you have any technical difficulties, please send a direct message to tech support who can help you. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel. And so with all of that out of the way, I'd like to begin with a little bit of introduction. We all know that data matters, and as public health professionals and researchers, we understand the importance of policies and programs that are driven by data. And in terms of hidden hunger or micronutrient deficiencies, the Lancet Global Health Report from last October indicated that at the global level, 1 in 2 women and 1 in 3 children worldwide are not getting the vitamins and minerals they need in order to support optimal health. However, we are living in an era of food crises, making healthy diets even more out of reach to many populations. And the reality is likely higher than these estimates. The estimates are also cause for alarm and shine a light on the need for more country-specific data that can be used to implement more effective nutrition programs. For national governments, there's often inadequate data on nutrition and micronutrient status. We're here today to discuss some of the countries that have embraced micronutrient data to respond to their own local challenges. Ultimately, their data will support more impactful programming and help stakeholders know where, when, and how to respond. By coming together in this platform, we welcome our panelists and everyone who has joined us for a discussion and exchange so that we know what investments in micronutrient data need to be made. For today's webinar, we are featuring 3 case studies that were designed to highlight the use of micronutrient data in policy and program decisions from Guatemala, Ethiopia, and Nepal. These case studies provide examples of how micronutrient data can influence national nutrition and health programs with valuable lessons on implementation and important health outcomes. After some brief introductions to the various contexts, today's webinar will primarily be discussion with the 4 panelists, so there will be plenty of time for questions from the audience. So with that, I would like to introduce our 4 guests, and if I could have this slide with everyone's photo on it, that would be great. All right. So first, we have Abel Ahmed. We'll discuss the case study from Ethiopia. Abel has a master's degree in food science and nutrition. He has worked in the fields of nutrition and food safety, food fortification, the private food industry, and agriculture and nutrition linkages for more than 14 years. He helped with the development and implementation of a number of important guidelines and strategies, including the National Micronutrient Deficiency Prevention and Control Guideline. He is currently the National Food Fortification Technical Advisory at the Ministry of Industry's Food and Beverage Industry Research Development Center in Ethiopia. To discuss with us the experience in Guatemala, we have with us Mireya Palmieri. Mireya has a bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's in government and politics in Latin America, and a master's in urban and regional development planning. She has more than 40 years of experience in policy analysis, planning, monitoring, and evaluation of food and nutrition security programs and projects. Since 1982, she has held management positions at the Institute of Nutrition of Central America and Panama, INCAP, where she is currently the Director of Epidemiological Health and Nutrition Surveillance. I just also want to note that she is not a representative of the Guatemalan government, although she has been working in Guatemala for a number of years. For the case study from Nepal, we are joined by Naveen Podial. Naveen has a bachelor's degree in food technology and a master's in nutrition and dietetics. He has more than 23 years of work experience in the field of nutrition in Nepal. Naveen has contributed to the formulation of a wide range of policies, strategies, and implementation guidelines, including the first and second multi-sector nutrition plans, the adolescent nutrition guideline, and the community-based infant and young child nutrition linked with multiple micronutrient powder distribution strategy. He joined UNICEF in 2009 and is currently a nutrition officer for UNICEF Nepal. And lastly, to discuss with us a more global perspective, we are joined by Lynette Neufeld. Lynette holds a master's and PhD in international nutrition from Cornell University. She began her career in an academic position at the National Institute of Public Health in Mexico, where she led a variety of implementation research and impact evaluation studies to improve the impact potential and social protection programs. Since then, she has brought her passion for improving the generation and utilization of evidence in program design to delivery at various NGOs. She is currently the Director of Food and Nutrition of the Food and Nutrition Division at FAO and the President of the International Union of Nutrition Scientists. So, with those introductions, I would now like to ask each of our panelists from the 3 countries to describe to us the data ecosystem within your country and what are some of the key lessons learned for strengthening micronutrient data systems. So I will start first with Abel. And actually, I should check. He was having trouble joining us, so.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I will present the case of Ethiopia, how we are utilizing micronutrient data for policy and program decisions. First of all, Ethiopia is following a multi-sectoral coordination for addressing malnutrition in Ethiopia. We have a national nutrition coordination body, the upper body to coordinate all the national nutrition programs and also for the implementations. This body is coordinating at the higher level and is responsible for the Deputy Prime Minister. Under that, we have a National Nutrition Technical Committee. It's a higher level technical committee composed of different stakeholders from academia, research institute, government agencies, and development partners. So we have that higher level technical committee. Under that, we have the National Program Coordination Steering Committee. There are 3 steering committees. One is the Program Coordination Steering Committee, which is led by the Minister of Health. And the second one is Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning, and also Research Steering Committee. And this is led by Ethiopian Public Health Institute, the technical wing of the Ministry of Health. And the third and very important steering committee is the Food Fortification Steering Committee, and this is again led by the Ministry of Industry. Under that, we have a technical committee, which is led by the Food and Beverage Industry Research and Development Center. So we have active nutrition coordination platforms at the higher level, and that is also cascaded to downstreams. Ethiopia is transiting from a siloed effort to a multi-sectoral approach. And in that case, different ministries and sectors are really engaged in nutrition activity. For example, the Ministry of Industry, as I mentioned earlier, is leading the National Food Fortification Program. And to give you another example, for example, we have a National Nutrition Sensitive Agricultural Strategy, which is led by the Ministry of Agriculture. We have the school feeding program, and that's also led by the Ministry of Education. So the different stakeholders have their own role and responsibility to address nutrition and health related problems in Ethiopia. That's a huge progress, and we have a lot of achievements in that aspect. Currently, we are developing terms of reference to establish the National Nutrition, the National Food Fortification Alliance to bring on board the private stakeholders. So far, the government is at the driving seat to coordinate many of the nutrition agendas, including the food fortification program. But we would like to bring the private sector in the forefront of the nutrition agenda. As for that, we are establishing the Food Fortification Alliance for our food fortification program to speed up the program implementation. The data ecosystem in Ethiopia, as most of you know, we have collected data every 5 years. The Ethiopian Public Health Institute is responsible with different development partners, international universities, research institutes, with the support of technical and financial support from the different stakeholders. Ethiopian Public Health Institute is responsible to collect data every 5 years. So we do collect micronutrient data. We do collect food consumption data, coverage data. So we have data at household level, at individual level, and at the facility level. So that's also another good practice in Ethiopia. We have established a system to collect such kind of data every 5 years. Secondly, we also collect routine data. We have a well-established and well-integrated system that is UNIS. We call it UNIS, Unified Nutrition Information System. It's integrated from the down level administrative, the down administrative level, that's the Kabale, the lower administrative level, that's the Kabale, to the federal level. So we have that system to collect routine data from the different sectors. And we are using that system also to give feedback back to the data providers. So we have that system. And come to the food fortification related data, we are establishing the National Food Fortification Information System at the Food and Beverage Industry Research and Development Center. We aim to collect data from the private sectors, the development partners, government agencies, and other key stakeholders who have the role in food fortification program. So we have identified the key indicators for the different stakeholders. So we'll be collecting data. We'll be centrally synthesize the data to make an informed decision and also to give feedback to the data providers. That is a data ecosystem in Ethiopia in general. We have also a National Data Management Center based in at EPHI. So that's also a huge opportunity for us to utilize the data collected by the different parties or stakeholders. We have actually there are a lot of policies, programs, and strategies driven by the data we have. For example, we have developed or endorsed the National Food and Nutrition Strategy. It was endorsed in 2018. So we have, the the National Food and Nutrition Policy. We have endorsed it in 2018. So, for example, food fortification is boldly indicated in this policy document. So, just to mention, we have a policy, and we have also a 10-year strategy, food and nutrition strategy, which will be implemented for the next 10 years. We have different programs and strategies that's driven by data we have.
Thank you. I think we'll have to wrap up just for time and move on to our next speaker.
Okay.
And we'll move to Mireya next, and we'll come back to you with some more questions later on.
Thank you.
But I also want to point out we're not using slides just to try and have a more discussion atmosphere. So if you're not seeing anything that's normal, once we go to the discussion, you'll see all of us together. So I will move on to Mireya for the same question to help set the stage for Guatemala.
Thank you very much. Hello from Guatemala. I'm going to try to do justice to the very well-crafted case study that has been written on Guatemala in this summary. So regarding the situation in my country in terms of evidence for policy making and program implementation, and following on the broad strokes of the outline of the case study, I would like to first say that there are various success factors related to the use of information for decision-making at the different levels. I would like to start with the fact that in Guatemala, there has been an awareness regarding the importance of dealing with micronutrient deficiencies for a very long time. I think that this has to do with the very existence of INCAP, like we like to think. Those who work at INCAP or have worked at INCAP for a long time. The very existence of the Institute in Guatemala and in Central America has meant that there is an awareness due to the very intensive and quality basic and implementation research carried out throughout the years. INCAP is an institution that next year will celebrate its 75th year of functioning in Central America. So we, I think, have definitely helped the awareness in Guatemala regarding the importance of micronutrient deficiencies. Another success factor is the fact that there is an organizational structure, legislation, and a regulatory framework that has been updated throughout the years regarding major micronutrient deficiencies. So that has been very helpful. And another factor, another success factor for me has been the fact that since a very long time, there's been an alliance forged between the public and the private sector regarding micronutrient deficiencies and the different ways and strategies to combat these deficiencies. So I want to set the stage. I wanted to set the stage first and say that we have a long history of micronutrient program implementation, and we have a very sound and updated organizational and legislative framework to help us regarding the solution of micronutrient deficiencies. Then, as we follow on the outline of the case study, we have had for a long time different schemes of data collection. At the beginning, since the end of the 1950s, the 1960s, etc., we have had small-scale assessments in the country, and we also have had different large-scale surveys at the national level that have definitely placed the problem of micronutrient deficiencies in the forefront of national policies. So I think that we will be able to explain much better the different ways that data collection and data availability informs decision-making as soon as we discuss the different topics in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Mira. And now we'll move to Naveen to discuss the landscape in Nepal.
Thank you, Megan. Since I think that this is your first question, what the data ecosystem in Nepal. So basically, when you talk about data ecosystem, there are institutions, there are research agencies, and also sectors. So we have to understand, before 1990s, there are not a very kind of robust data system in nutrition. And because of the World Children Movement in 1990s, Nepal began to think about the nutrition-related data. And the first survey was done in 1998. And that brought some nutrition-related data, especially on vitamin A, iron deficiency, and the data were there. And the earlier days, there was not a very specific nutrition strategy, but this survey brought a kind of political commitment to develop a strategy, and also by reaching in 2021, we also joined the SUN movement, and because of all the data, the government started to think about the multi-sectoral approach on nutrition, and Nepal started to develop the nutrition strategies. And first was in 1998, and then multi-sectoral study the next one formed in the 2012, and now we are forming the third multi-sectoral strategy. But all these multi-sectoral studies are under the lead of National Planning Commission. So mainly, when you talk about the data related ownership, it goes in the National Planning Commission, but the data are derived from the different sources. For example, if you look at the data responsible body for data, it is there is already it is called Central Bureau of Statistics, but now it is on National Statistics Office, which is under the Prime Minister Office. So that is responsible to centrally deposit the data, and that has authority on the data use. So this data is also housed in the different sectors. For example, under Ministry of Health, there is a HMI section and LMI section. They keep the data, both even the nutrition related routine data that is available. And also there is this governance sector, that is the Ministry of Federal Affairs, local government, that keeps the nutrition sensitivity related data, and education sector, education related. So all the data that nutrition that is kept in the different sectors, but that is used by the nutrition technical group in Nepal, which is composed by the different academia, nutritionists, union partners. They use this data for analysis the program to take decision making and to support the government. So, and the other source of data that originates, especially the service-based data, that comes from the private sector organization on the contractual basis. For example, New Era, that helped union organization and the government to develop 1998 Micronutrient survey report as well as the 2060 survey report. So data is also available. So, but the ownership goes to the government, and to create all this data, there is also international support. International agencies are also supporting. For example, Center for Disease Control Atlanta, they helped for 2016 NMS. Also, USAID had the funding to support this survey, and UNICEF was on the lead to carry out the survey. So this micronutrient data is generated in that way. At the same time, 1998 data, there was a micronutrient initiative, Nutrition International. So in a different time frame, different agencies plays a vital role to generate a national level data. But still, there are some need to develop very strong regulations, regulatory guideline on storing, centrally storing and use of data, because data are scattered in different agencies, and sometimes the researcher finds very hard to find the data and to get the approval. So on the use of data, that is a challenge I'm thinking. I think I tried to answer the first question, describe the data system. Of course, this data is helpful to take some programming decision. For example, Nepal now planning to move from IFA supplementation, maternal micronutrient supplementation, because NMS data has supported the evidences. So even we are revising the salt standard because the iodine level in salt is very high. So that is a database result decisions we are making. And also we are thinking there is when we triangulated data from for the vitamin A vinyl vitamin campaign, that is a one of success program, and there was a question how long will go. So we tried to answer the question by data triangulation based on demographic data from the NDHS, public health data, and this also the micronutrient survey data. But the gap is on the micronutrient intake from the dietary sources is still in the gap. So we are advocating for that survey through our nutrition technical groups. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Naveen. And lastly, we'll move to Lynette. Would you be able to describe some of the global efforts designed to increase the quality of nutrient data?
Sure, thanks. I wanted to just take a moment to highlight 3 key areas that I think have really surfaced from the different examples that facilitate both the generation but also the use of data in programs related to micronutrients. And that is commitment and political will, resources, obviously, and technical capacity. So let me just take a moment to talk through some of the resources that are out there. And perhaps we can either share them if you have them on hand in the chat link, or perhaps they can be shared later, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So in terms of political will and commitment, this is clearly a key factor that was highlighted by the different speakers as a fundamental success. And I think some of the work that the Micronutrient Forum and other groups have been doing to highlight case studies and good practice examples that have highlighted barriers, enablers, and success stories is a really fundamental resource. So just to highlight 2 of those, for micronutrient survey data, IZINC and the Micronutrient Forum published a report, I believe that was last year, on barriers and enablers for including micronutrient status data in surveys. And they really highlight some of the fundamental factors that can facilitate and enable that political will and commitment. In a similar report, but for the dietary intake data, which is one of the areas of data that were highlighted by some of the speakers. The Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, worked with intake to do a very similar kind of report. This was published in 2022 and highlighted both some of the success stories on collecting dietary data, but also on its utilization and the factors that contributed to those success. And then, of course, we've got DataDent, which is an evidence-based advocacy and support platform, which can provide resources and as sort of at the tip of the finger resources for making the case for resources. So that takes me into for data for micronutrients, whether that be micronutrient status data or dietary data. So that takes me to the second key point, which is the resources. Again, there are tools that are available to support that, developing the business case that could enable and enhance the capacity to pull together those resources. And I just like to call attention to one, which is the multiple micronutrient supplement cost benefit tool that was developed by Nutrition International that helps make the business case and really do some trade-off assessments of the cost and benefit implications of moving from iron folic acid supplementation to multiple micronutrient supplementation. So a good example of a tool that can help that and build that case for support for investment in micronutrient programming. I know that the Micronutrient Forum is also has been advocating for, and I think they would be better placed than me to update on where that stands. But we know that the resources for actually collection of micronutrient data, and particularly micronutrient status data, but also on the dietary intake side, is really a huge challenge. It's a huge barrier, and there's been some work of the forum advocating for a pooled fund. So maybe that's something we can come back to in the discussion. And then I want to take a moment to talk about the efforts around the capacity development, because there are a lot of different kinds. And these different tools and approaches and the support really sort of take different approaches. One supporting the generation of new data, but there's also many that are supporting the better utilization of existing data. And I think we really need to emphasize that. We shouldn't ignore the fact that there's so much data existing, and sometimes we haven't leveraged that data as much as we should for programming and so forth. So, so the three areas that I want to focus on very quickly are the micronutrient status data. We know that there is, and if you're not aware of it, please do look it up. WHO published a micronutrient survey manual. I believe there was an older one, which was updated in 2020, provides all of the good practice on designing and implementing micronutrient status surveys, and including the laboratory component, which is really fundamental to ensure that those data, when the investments are made with high quality. So draw your attention to that. And then, of course, as has been highlighted, there is direct technical support from many different organizations for micronutrient surveys. CDC, UNICEF was mentioned. There's many others who provide that technical support directly. So that's for generation of new data. Similarly, on generation of new data on the dietary intake side, there is similarly good practice guidance for dietary intake surveys, that the kind of surveys that can generate information about micronutrient status, micronutrient intakes. Intake is one of the organizations housed in FHI 360 that provides direct technical support. Again, fundamental to ensure that we have high quality data and that the latest best practices are used in that regard. Sorry. So that's on the generation of data. There's also a lot of work going on to improve the quality of data that exists. In that regard, food composition tables are fundamental for analysis of any dietary intake data, and the network in foods, which is hosted by FAO, but involves food composition experts from around the world, is a really fundamental resource, both for understanding the origin of food composition data, but also for strengthening that. And then I see that Megan has come online. So just to wrap up quickly, there are many tools for program planning and implementation. For fortification, we have FRAT, the Fortification Rapid Assessment Tool, been around for a long time. The Fortification Assessment Coverage Tool. There's a manual that was published in 2021 by GAIN for the analysis of fortified foods on their technical content. There's the Fill the Nutrient Gap analysis. And I could go on and on with a number of other tools that we just really have to make sure we are using. So just to sum up, we have a lot of good practice examples. We have an abundance of tools and guidelines. We have organizations that provide direct support. And I think the big gap that we have, and there's still a lot of room for improvement, is in mobilizing those resources, matching the needs with those resources, and making sure that they're brought to bear, both in the generation and in the utilization of data. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that incredible bit of information on all of the efforts going on around supporting data use and quality. And so I see actually quite a lot of questions in the chat. Some of them are being answered by the panelists, but it would be nice to return to them. So I think what I'll do is just ask one question more to each of the speakers, and then we'll go to the general Q&A with everyone. So I think for now, if our panelists could all turn their cameras on, and I will turn first to Abel and ask, how much does data factor into policy decision-making at the national level within Ethiopia?
Thank you very much again. Yes, we are utilizing micronutrient data for the different decision makings. For example, I can give you one example. We have a food fortification program nationally, and we have been working to fortify 3 commodities in Ethiopia: wheat flour, edible oil, and edible salt. The edible salt already has a mandatory standard a decade ago, and we are implementing that one. But it took like 10 plus years to endorse mandatory standard for wheat flour and edible oil. So what we did is we are utilizing the data we have nationally. You know, we collected micronutrient survey in 2015 and consumption survey in 2013. So we used that data to convince our decision makers and policy makers. So just a year ago, we have endorsed compulsory standards for wheat flour and edible oil fortification. So our justification is mainly based on the data we have nationally. So that's one example I can mention. Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Thank you. I think the next question I'll pose to Mireya, and this is around, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing in Guatemala for using data to drive policy decision making?
Thank you, Megan, for that question. I would say that there are 2 big challenges. One is the lack of awareness in general about the usefulness of good evidence for decision making. And that is expressed by the fact that many implementators do not assign enough resources for assessment, monitoring, and evaluation in their projects, in their strategies, etc. So there is a lack of awareness of about the usefulness of evidence for decision making, and that is very problematic. On the whole, people think that evaluations can be carried out with a minimum budget, and they definitely do not regard evaluation costs as very important. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is that there has been a lack of coordination, in spite of the fact that I said that there is a regulatory framework and an organizational structure that is very helpful. There is a lack of coordination, but that's a problem, that's a government problem between the policy stakeholders and the technical stakeholders on the whole. However, this has been remedied to a certain extent by the fact that the food and nutrition policy has been updated. And this exercise has meant that there has been a coming together of different groups, and that the policy now reflects the main nutrition problems in the country. In the past, it used to reflect mainly stunting and acute malnutrition. Now, the assessment is more comprehensive, and that has meant that groups are coming together, and the political Food and Nutrition Security Commission has been empowered by this new policy. And that's where I would stop and continue to give answers later on.
Great, thank you. I think I'll direct my next question to Lynette. So this one is, how can we advocate for greater and better use of data to policymakers? I think this somewhat relates to some of Maria's comments as well around, the recognition for data and the allocated resources. But
yeah, thanks for the question, Megan. I think it's really important to remember that data will only ever be one input into the many complex elements that come together in decision making and policy and program planning. So don't underestimate the role of data, but don't overestimate it as well. It is one of many inputs, and it's one of many pressures. So we have to make it relevant and meaningful to policymakers and decision makers, right? Data in itself, numbers in itself are not what's meaningful. It's how we take them forward and how we make them relevant to the agendas that are on the table, and to the pressures and the many other competing priorities that policymakers are under. So interpretation of data and that translation from the numbers into what this means and how this can help achieve the goals that the government has set and so forth is really, really fundamental. We don't always do enough about that. I think it's often good for us to revisit some of the resources that are out there. We've got the famous 2006 World Bank book about repositioning nutrition as central development. Pick up those messages and build on those, make them relevant. But be careful there, because we also know that programs are always subject to, and even data and the resources that are allocated for the collection of data are subject to political agendas. And we've seen that happen in countries where large investments through political processes are canceled, and the resources sent in another direction. So having that long-term vision and adapting the messaging so that that maintains that political relevance as agendas change, political parties change, and so forth is really fundamental.
great, thank you. And for my last question of the discussion, I'll direct this one to Naveen and ask, what kind of support do decision makers need to be able to use data effectively in order to drive policy decisions?
Yeah, actually, the most difficult part in this micronutrient data is that is very complex, and they have difficult to understand, and even they are not very oftenly they come across that type of data. So the first thing is they need to be engaged in this data related discussion. Most of the time they are missed out. So that's the one, and they had to understand. We need to help them to understand data, and for that purpose, we need to translate this complex data in very simpler form, like a policy brief form. Even the research data, sometimes the policymaker has a hard time to read and go through and well digest. So the national level stakeholders in the country, the academician, even the international global community, they should come with the very brief and very straightforward policy briefs that will help for decision making. That and sometimes data triangulation is very important, because one data is speak one and other data is speaking. They have hard to understand what data speaks what. So they need to help them to understand if there are multiple data sources, how do they can triangulate and make a better decision, as we did in the GAVA workshop in the Budapest. So policymakers engage and they understand where the data gap. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I've also, Mireya has asked to respond to this question as well, so I'll turn to her for her reply.
Yes, I would just like to add to the discussion the fact that decision makers need a type of evidence, like Lynette was saying, not any evidence, but evidence that induces them to action. And I have felt that, at least in Guatemala, it has been very useful to use different analyses on years lost due to different micronutrient deficiencies. This kind of analysis gives decision makers information regarding of what are the very important social and economic impacts of malnutrition. And this discussion in the country has been very useful. I know that various organizations have performed these types of analysis, so I want to suggest that people look at these types of analysis about the impact of malnutrition, micronutrient malnutrition, and other forms of the double burden of malnutrition. Thank you very much.
Great. So at this point, we'll open it up to questions from the audience, and a number of people have already put their questions in. And the panelists, if you're able to respond to some of these directly, you're most welcome, but I'll try to pick up a few of them here. And so one of the questions comes from Ken Brown and asks, what were some of the decisions taken by governments that were based on the available data and that were only possible because of the data available? And Naveen gave a nice example of this with the salt iodine content in Nepal. But I'm wondering, I saw Abel also replied to this in the chat, but if you want to give your answer verbally, or if others would like to add into this.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, I already mentioned earlier, and we have influenced the decision makers using the data we have in our hand. And the best example is the food fortification program to address micronutrient deficiencies. But in addition to that, I would like to add a couple of points on the better advocacy of data. You know, as mentioned earlier by one of the speakers, advise to use a bottom-up and top-down approach, right? We have to engage simultaneously the decision makers and also the experts in the downstream. So in that case, we will be very successful. And the other point that I would like to add is, you know, please don't ignore the frequently asked questions, right? You know, the number of questions may come from the different stakeholders or experts. Instead of ignoring them, it's good to properly address so that we can move forward together. The other point is, we have to also consider the data-driven and data-informed decision-making process. As mentioned by one of the speaker, data is one variable among the many variables to make decision. So data-informed decision is better sometimes that means we can include other elements to make the decision. So we cannot rely totally on the numbers and figures and so on. So that will help a lot. In addition to that, it's always good to, when we communicate our data or our cause, it's good to link or, interrelate with what the decision makers would like to hear, so that we can get their buy-in, just to listen and also act on the points that we like to make. So these are some of the things that we need to consider when we communicate and advocate data. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And we'll move to another question from PUC that I think I'll direct to Naveen. And this is, in developing resources for generation and utilization of data, is cost taken into account in using this resource by least developed countries?
Yeah, in this question, thank you for the question. Actually, least developed countries has always the constant financial constraint, especially in this global crisis. And so whenever we consider, we have a data, we consider, and so far as possible, we try to use existing intervention. For example, we had high aspiring infection country. So rather than going on the treatment approach, we went to the WAS approach. So that is more cost effective. So we try to go with the cost-effective strategies to address the challenges so far as possible. Also selecting the indicator, we prioritize. For example, we are planning for next micronutrient status survey. So we are under discussion whether thiamine should be collected on the national micronutrient survey or not, because there is a 60% household are consuming commercial processed rice. So there is potential for the thiamine deficiency. So it depends. We also look for the various type of data before deciding anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see a question from Solange that Abel has answered in the chat, but also was directed to Guatemala. So I'll pose this one to Mireya. But Guatemala is one of the NIPIN countries that NIPIN works with. And so how do you include micronutrient data into the platform? And if so, which indicators are being included?
I imagine that platform refers to Civesno, the Civesno system, or is the question posed regarding another platform? Megan.
I think it's for work with the NIPIN group, so the National Information Platforms for Nutrition, which is led through the EU. But perhaps I imagine it uses. Yeah.
I don't have very recent information regarding that platform. So if I may, I could explain how we include micronutrient data on our surveillance system, which has been acting as a platform to inform policymakers and program implementers. For example, data from Civesno has been used to adjust the vitamin A supplementation program in the Ministry of Health very recently, using data from the surveillance system. That's what I wanted to mention in order to respond to Dr. Brown's question. Every cycle of the surveillance system, we carry out an analysis of remaining data that we have to collect in terms of micronutrients. there are core indicators that we collect every cycle, like anemia, iron deficiency, vitamin A deficiency, inflammation, and iodine deficiency in women. And then we add every cycle different micronutrients that either have not been collected recently or were not analyzed properly. And this is what has been guiding us in terms of including micronutrient data. I just want to point out that in the current cycle, 2022-2023, we are collecting in our surveillance system intake data in order to be able to have a fuller picture of micronutrient deficiencies and its determinants. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. I see one of the other questions from Berhan, which I'll also try to answer in addition to Abel's answer in writing. But they basically state that they hope the detailed information and best practice will be shared or presented in international arenas, and asks, is there a continuous platform to share information or best practice with other countries? And I think this is one of the opportunities that DINA itself would like to play, and one of the motivations for these case studies. So I think if there's appetite and demand from others, we would gladly continue sharing some of these success stories when micronutrient data are really being well advocated for, generated, and then used in terms of making policy and program decisions. So this is something we would like to do. Although if there are other resources out there, it would be really nice to share those. So if others are aware, perhaps you can also type those into the chat. But I think there is definitely a lot of appetite from learning from different countries' experiences. So I hope this is something that we'll be able to continue. I see Soraya has asked several questions in the chat, but I think I'll focus on one of them, and that is, do you face any challenges in collecting nutrition data? Does anyone want to address that in particular?
I would like to give a very short answer. Yes, we face challenges in terms of quality control, for sure. In terms of being able to monitor availability of supplies, lab supplies in the field and for processing at the lab level. Yes, we face many challenges in the field, but I think that the surveillance system is a team effort, and in this regard, the team at INCAP has been very, very, very efficient in terms of guaranteeing that we resolve all the challenges related to field operations and analysis at the at INCAP level. Thank you.
Great. And I see from the chat as well, Rebecca has put in the link for Data for Nutrition, the community of practice that is led through DataDent. So that's also another great resource for sharing experiences. And there's a fairly large community of people interested in nutrition there. I also, Naveen, would you like to reply to that question regarding some of the challenges in collecting nutrition data?
Yeah, especially the low resource country, it is really challenging because the first is resources, how to invest. That is a major challenge because the country has government has a limited capacity. But at the same time, the challenge is in the infrastructure side as well, because the micronutrient data requires a very good cold chain system, and sometimes it never been always perfect in many areas. Electricity fluctuations and all the other government services are also causes the troubles in the collecting data. And laboratory capacity in the country level is weak, so we have to rely on the international laboratories for the assessment of the analysis of the data. So this global barriers, public health rules are also sometimes comes as a barrier. So from the resource to the operation side, there are a lot of challenges for the country. However, with the collective efforts and partnership, we can overcome with these challenges as well, as we did in 2016 National Micronutrient Survey. Thank you.
Great. And I'll go back to Abel once more just to ask the question about how we can advocate for better data. Would you like to reply to that?
So sorry, Megan.
There's a question as well that I think you'd like to respond to regarding how we can better advocate for data or advocate for better data.
Okay, thank you so much. I thought I already addressed this question, but I can add a couple of points. Yeah, yeah. The other point that I would like to add, if you give me the opportunity, is communication matters. The way you communicate with the different stakeholders matters. We usually use our jargons and technical words to explain our agenda, or the policymakers and decision makers who are sometimes not familiar with nutrition agenda. So our communication matters. So we have to customize the way of presentation and communication for the different stakeholders. So that's one thing. And the other is we have to also demonstrate impact on the economy and overall development for the country, and also the health and nutrition impacts. So there will be, when we explain those issues, there will be alert and conscious to listeners and make decisions. So these are some of the points that I would like to add. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. And before I close out, would any of the panelists like to address any of the questions or say anything that they may not have had a chance to say in their previous comments?
Can I continue?
Naveen, please go ahead,
okay.
and then I'll go. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'll start with Naveen, and then we'll go to come back to you.
Okay, most often what I see here in the country level is there is disconnect between different type of data, especially clinical data versus this public health data. There is no connections, and that needs to be established, because for example, there is autoimmune thyroidism or anything, and there is exercise in what is the linkage. So the policymakers are not understanding these linkages. So we have to help them to understand there is a linkage between different type of data. Thank you.
Great. And Lynette, I'll go to you.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly acknowledge the question that an anonymous attendee wrote just now in the chat. And I think it's a very important question raised about whether qualitative research has a role to play in all that we're discussing. And I think that's really fundamental, because a lot of the work that we do with fortification, with, for example, targeted fortified foods, we go on the assumption that they will be well accepted and consumed, and therefore will have an impact. If we don't include qualitative research and understanding the acceptability, the use patterns, the barriers, and so forth, we can't adjust the design of those programs in a way to ensure that they will be impactful. So as a complement to all of the things that we've been discussing, absolutely, qualitative research has a fundamental role to play. Thanks for the question.
Great. And Abel, I'll come back to you next for your comments.
Thank you again. I just want to add, on the point you raised, like how we can really support the policymakers, right? To utilize the data we have. I think, most of the time they don't have time to read the whole document and so on. So we have to summarize, and we have to prepare a kind of pager or two, which includes all the key elements for them to understand the whole concept of our agenda. So that will help them to digest and understand well. So that gives the power for them to make decisions. That's one thing. And also, it's good to demonstrate the significance of the data and implications for economy and other aspects. So in that case, I will accept very quickly. And most of the time, we have to be careful when we present our data for the policymakers. Is one, we are talking about persons, proportions and numbers, but we have to give them an impression behind the numbers and the persons, right? We talked about the prevalence and so on, but they may not understand well. So we have to explain in a way that they can understand better. Yeah, thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And I'll also go to Mireya for some last comments.
I would like to address the question regarding qualitative research. It's very important. I agree wholeheartedly with Lynette. We have used it and are planning to use qualitative research in order to assess compliance with targeted micronutrient fortified foods. So that's definitely very important. And regarding how much does data factor into policy decision making, I would say partially. I would concur with the rest of the panelists that I think that it's a question of setting priorities, and that is helped by having leaders, nutrition leaders, that can help to set the agenda, the nutrition agenda. And that is something that, at least in Guatemala, is at the moment lacking very much. Thank you.
Great. So I'd really like to thank all of our speakers today. We're running low on time, so I'll start to just close out, but I'd like to summarize what we've seen from these case studies. And the first, I think, major message that we're hearing is collaboration is key to success. This is something we saw. It's important to bring together to work towards a common goal, and was critical for each of the success stories that we heard from. A lot of partners were involved. The second, I think, major thing that we're hearing is that the data needs to be open and available. So this, having access to the timely data, is very important for making decisions. And the other thing that I think we've heard a lot today too is that data need to be translated in order to empower decision makers. So this is everything from the briefs that Naveen mentioned, and also helping to summarize them. I think Abel mentioned they may not get through the briefs. So making sure that the information is distilled in a way that they can access and use ready at their fingertips. And I think we also heard from Mireya here that the allocating of resources among these decision makers and policymakers is also quite critical. So with that, I would like to thank everyone. I have two small announcements, so if I could get the slides. There should be the ones after those intro. But we will be hosting another webinar on May 17th through the forum, and this will be discussing the micronutrient supplements, which are have been highlighted as one of the best bets for development based on the 2023 Copenhagen Consensus Report. So you can register now on our website. And then for the next slide, this is to, there we go. Just to let you know that early bird registration is now open for the Micronutrient Forum 6th Global Conference on Nutrition for Resilience. So this will be a hybrid virtual and in-person conference held in The Hague in October 16th through 20th. And you can register on the website or learn more. And I know Rajuta is putting the links for these in the chat to everyone. So if you're interested in learning more or reading some of the white papers that have been developed for the conference program, you're more than welcome to go there. And with that, I would really like to thank you all so much for your participation, and all of our speakers once more for for joining us. And if you are interested in learning more about DINA, you are welcome to join as a member. This is free for those who are interested, and we're looking forward to engaging much more with the community and sharing more of these success stories around micronutrient data. So thank you all.
Thank you.